Blakes are of a bygone era, flashing in the trees like torn doilies and plastic bags. Our messengers will not be soft or spare, trumpet-throated or sound like feed sacks falling on hay. Rather, their feathers are a grim, ripe speech over a fire escape and a clothesline, an absence acutely like death, but without its approval, a life running parallel but apart, confounding evensong. But then even the birds have changed. The cardinal will become a crow, a star of oil in the snow, bearing a slim banner. Like street lights speaking to themselves in a storm, they are pedestrian, flashing their signals for an empty street, crossing one divide for another darkness. I wrote this poem in college. At the time, I was reading a lot of William Blake, drawn to his rejection of materialism, to his abhorrence of rigid dichotomies, and the attempt to identify light and dark as separate features in the human soul and suppress the latter. He saw the world suffused in spiritual energy, bursting at the seams. The spiritual realm was inbreaking despite the black smoke of industry. Angels interrupt the skyline of the city with their own unlikely visions. Even as a young child, Blake's mind was sharpened to observe another world folded into this one. According to one of his biographers, Alexander Gilchrist, on one of his rambles outside, he was startled to see a tree filled with angels, bright angelic wings bespangling every bough like stars. His parents were not amused at such a story, and only his mother's pleadings prevented him from receiving a beating. Perhaps I was looking at a plastic bag stuck to a black power line, blowing in the wind, and wondering if it was God's greeting or a small flag of resignation to a world without God. Where young Blake saw wings of white, I wanted to believe our divine visitors weren't harbingers of an abdication. They just look differently, and we have to try harder to see them. My sister once asked, why did the people of the Old Testament and the New Testament get angels and burning bushes and even the yawning wounds of Jesus' hands to feel and see the presence of God? And we don't get any of that stuff. I said, that's an interesting question. When we read the Exodus account, we might feel that world's distance from our own. When I was young, I felt like Blake too. I felt God's presence so strongly. I felt I saw him in the slant of light pouring in from the stained glass windows in our church. He was in the incense and the smoke thrown out by the thurible. And if you've never seen a thurible in action, church nerds, we love this. We really geek out. The incense smoking, it's this thing that you throw back and forth. Now that's the business. As I got older and my understanding of God and faith itself changed, I did not have as many of these moments of mystical greeting. Not that I felt for one moment that God wasn't there, but the immediacy and the comfort of that presence was muted. I've always felt this sort of like homesickness in my soul that's not really tied to a physical location. Could it be anything other than the memory of being with God, of longing to return to God? So I wanted to investigate today if perhaps in the very missing, God is disclosing God's self. I know I'm not alone in what some of the mystics and ordinary folk call the dark night of the soul, loneliness, existential terror, or simply despair. The burning bush. Our God is a God of revelation, a God of encounter, a God who came to be with us. Our God is also sometimes silent, inscrutable, and yes, hidden. The poet David in the Psalms is filled with longing to see God, Jesus asked in the garden, "Why have you forsaken me, Father?" And even Moses, who hears the Lord in the bush and sees his wonders, wants more and asks to see his face, to see his glory, even if it burns. Once he has felt the scorching presence, it's impossible not to feel bereft when it's gone. So I'm trying to make sense of these two contrary experiences in our faith journey. And this text is rich with that struggle and it's the different opposites that are. The God who finally appears in the book of Exodus is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God who promised Israel abundance and liberation. The burning bush, there is a symbolism too in the flame that does not consume. God is there, but not quite. And we sort of wish it would consume us. We are ready for the mission, but if only we could be told in what direction. God speaks out of this flame and commands Moses into a journey of terrible risk. The bush appears as a response to human suffering. God's wrath towards injustice burns hot, but the world is not yet purged. After touching holy ground for a brief moment, humanity must go out across the desert and into Pharaoh's kingdom, carrying that small flame, praying to keep it burning, having faith in things unseen. God was here, repeating God's words to us, keeping the course. Walter Brueggemann writes about this story, the qualitative distance between Yahweh and Moses, Israel, is maintained. God is indeed other, holy other, and Yahweh's entry into the slave camp surrenders none of that. Moses has enough assurance, but not as much as he might want. So it is with this holy God. The one revealed remains a mystery. Eventually, Moses and Israel will depart Egypt by faith, not by sight. Others have thought a lot about the meaning of God's hiddenness or that feeling of his not being here. The Luther's theology of the cross talks about God being hidden in the suffering, because if he came in all of his presence there, we wouldn't be able to exist. And something about him becoming vulnerable in that suffering, it's sort of like he had to make himself not there. So it's deeply complex, but I think it speaks to this human feeling we have of sometimes having experienced God, and then those times when God doesn't seem to be speaking to us, like he spoke to Moses in the flame. And how Moses, imagining his experience of having to go out after that, like you've had this mountaintop experience and then this huge mission, and how we keep the faith. How we keep the faith in the desert. Simone Weil also talks about God's hiddenness and wonders about it. One of the reasons she gives is, again, that absence allowing us the freedom and the ability to grow and to enact justice on behalf of God and for God and with God. And I think those are really powerful ways to think about the times that God feels hidden from us. Sometimes I have felt God and other times I cannot. But I do think God is to be seen and heard in the world. And there's plenty of people who still claim these divine visions and things like a burning bush. And, I think part of the hiddenness too, there's a call to humility instead of saying, I've just received the words of God and I'm going to tell you what they are. That's a different kind of revelation. That's a power that perhaps we shouldn't have. So there are other visions to be seen in the words of our children, and we keep looking for them, the signs of God, because God is here. And how do we cling to that faith? And I think what helps me to journey with that is to hold those two tensions together, not be afraid of holding the tension of God's presence and his absence. And in that suffering and in that sadness, exploring where God is in that, because he came and announced himself in suffering and the suffering of humanity. And so this is not a meditation with answers, so to speak, but just, I think, an encouragement to everyone in those dark nights and that loneliness, that is a part of our faith, and that is a part of us. And Simone Weil said, "The mysteries of faith are degraded if they are made into an object of affirmation and negation, when in reality they should be an object of contemplation." So we may not feel that we have those burning bush moments, or we did once long ago, and we're wondering if we can get back to that sort of ecstatic experience, that holy ground. And as an Easter people, as a liberated people, the revelation has come, and it's really God helping us to keep that revelation alive in our hearts. We've got a sleeper. You know it's good when you put him to sleep. But I'll leave you there that today. Just that we've all been on the mountaintop and had those ecstatic moments, and they are gifts to us, and I think they are to be seen in the world. But again, we have the strength to hold the tensions in our faith, and those tensions are beautiful, and they will journey with us even until the end. And that means our God cannot be contained or idolized or trivialized. We cannot touch him that way because the power is so awesome, and the mystery is a gift. Amen.